A new wave of tabletop RPGs are looking to dump a classic mechanic.
Good, then get the hell out of my life. Who needs you? Beat it. Leave me alone.
We've been talking a lot about the upcoming wave of big RPGs coming out in the next couple of years. Daggerheart, the MCDM RPG, and the Stormlight RPG all look to shake up the role-playing zeitgeist, or at least provide fans of rolling dice and telling stories with some new ways to do just that. As we've been talking with some of the designers of these various games over the last few months, we've noticed that a lot of these new RPGs have something in common. They are all either removing the roll to hit an opponent, or they are at the very least mitigating it in some way. Now, the roll to hit mechanic is one of the oldest mechanics in tabletop RPGs. Players roll a die or dice to see if their attack is successful, and if it is, they then roll damage. It's basically a holdover from tabletop war games, which is how tabletop RPGs originated, where players roll to hit for every single figure in a unit. Basically, when you're rolling like 20 d6s, you're almost certain to do something, even if you only kill an opposing unit on a successful 6 on a d6 roll, or at least have a chance to wound. Warhammer 40k fans will know what I'm talking about. However, in our recent interview, MCDM's James Introcaso mentioned that a simple roll-to-hit mechanic usually results in about a 1 in 3 chance that a player misses and then does nothing of note on their turn.
The roll-to-hit, we don't have anymore. When you make an attack against somebody, you roll damage, and you deal them that damage. And that gets rid of the roll to hit, which is basically a roll to see if you have a turn, right?
Yeah.
That, like, if I roll a 1 on my turn, I'm just not doing anything. That's not fun. And it doesn't feel heroic. That can be good for some other pulp games or dungeon crawling games where it's like, oh wow, I really got to do this. But if you want to feel like a hero, you should be doing something effective every round.
It's a big feel-bad moment that just about every player of D&D or Pathfinder regularly experiences at the table. Now, for both of those games, D&D and Pathfinder, you get around that through different mechanics. Dungeons & Dragons eventually offers most martial characters more attack rolls and higher attack rolls, higher attack modifiers. They give spellcasters, things where even if a player misses, they'll still do half damage or splash damage or something. Pathfinder offers players up to 3 attacks per turn, although, mind you, those second and third attacks are usually less successful, and there's all these various buffs and debuffs to increase the likelihood of a successful strike. If you really want to make sure you hit that enemy, maybe have a friend stand on the other side so you get that flanking bonus. Now, the MCDM RPG gets around this by skipping the roll to hit part of the turn altogether. Instead, players will roll for damage, and that damage is then reduced by the type of armor the target is wearing. Meanwhile, Daggerheart has the with hope or with fear mechanic that lets even a missed attack roll have some kind of positive impact or extra narrative consequence on their turn.
Basically, anything besides a success with hope, I as the GM get to make a move. So a miss with hope means you don't get what you want. You take a hope, but then I still get to make a move. A miss with fear means you don't get what you want and things go really badly, right? It's not quite a critical fail. It's not like you fall and stumble on your blade and stab yourself, right? That's not the way that the game is asking us to approach it, but it is saying what would happen if something, what would be the worst case scenario here for you? How would, what can, something gets cut off permanently, some sort of situation, some opportunity gets cut off permanently, something very bad in the narrative turns the story in a way we didn't expect. And so by creating that gradient of results, essentially what we're doing is creating many ways for the story to turn and really taking away the idea that the GM can just plan everything that happens.
Now, we actually reached out to Brotherwise Games, the maker of Stormlight RPG, and confirmed that they'll have a similar implementation to Daggerheart. They actually specifically credited Sadie Lowry for pointing out the flaw in the roll to hit mechanic in a series of tweets that she made earlier this year that, seems to lead to wasted turns. Now, We will note that these 3 games are hardly the first to remove a roll to hit mechanic from their games. Into the Odd, an absolutely fantastic game that also lacks a roll to hit mechanic, and actually James Introcaso, specifically mentioned that when we reached out to him for this video. We will also note that Tunnels and Trolls, one of the oldest tabletop RPGs, they use competing rolls to determine both whether a hit landed and whether it did damage. The Sentinels of the Multiverse RPG, that also just lets players roll for damage. However, it's interesting to note that so many new and upcoming RPGs are basically skipping the roll to hit mechanic. Now, in our recent talk with James Introcaso, he mentioned that missing isn't a bad mechanic.
In fact, James said that, and I quote here, "I think rolling to hit or miss is basically a mechanic that gives a player a 35% chance of not taking your turn. Around the office, we sometimes call the D20 the lose your turn die. Honestly, missing is a good mechanic in a game where it takes less than 5 minutes for it to be my turn again. Most crunchy D20 fantasy games take much longer than that, which makes combat tedious and unexciting if you're rolling poorly. A lot of great systems, like Into the Odd powered by the Apocalypse, make sure that something is always happening on your turn in combat, and we wanted to follow suit for our heroic game. We think missing doesn't feel heroic. This is all just one dude's opinion."
Now, of course, just because these games are doing away with the roll to hit, or at least trying to add something extra to that mechanic,
it doesn't mean that we will do away with rolling to hit or miss entirely in tabletop RPGs.
One of the core mechanics of Dungeons & Dragons is determining whether or not an attack hits in combat. I doubt that Wizards of the Coast is going to remove something like that when they eventually get to 6th edition, and nor should they. However, removing that mechanic or modifying it severely helps other tabletop RPGs feel distinct, and it lets them try to tell other types of stories, which honestly, that's the point of having all these different kinds of games in the first place. It's not because, we want to have all the stories feel similar, we want them to feel different, and changing up fundamental mechanics, that's a way to do that. So, what are your thoughts on the roll to hit mechanic? Love it or hate it? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to hit those like and subscribe buttons.